going to go ahead and start the session. Hello and welcome everyone. If you can please be sure to have your mics muted. My name is Boyd and my pronouns are they, them. And welcome to the second session of Compasionate Queers, Buddhists Making a Difference, a 4-part online series celebrating the good work being done by queer Buddhists around the world. I would like to do an acknowledgement of country and First Nations. I acknowledge that this land in the region of North Virginia in the United States was taken from its original stewards, the Manahat tribe. Rainbodhi acknowledges the traditional custodians of this land, and we pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and also extend this respect to all First Nations people around the world. Rainbodhi is a spiritual friendship group for LGBTQIA+ Buddhists and an advocate for more inclusion and diversity in the broader Buddhist community. We offer meditation, Dharma discussion, and social events in safe, supportive environment. We welcome everyone regardless of race, gender, sexuality, or ability. Rainbodhi is a non-sectarian group open to people from all Buddhist traditions, other faiths, or with no faith. All of our events are free. I would like to introduce today's special guest, speaker Kody Muncaster. Kody is a PhD candidate at the Western University and a scholar in queer and trans Buddhist studies. They also research HIV/AIDS, suicide prevention, and trans health. They are a Buddhist grief counselor at the Toronto Center for Applied Buddhism and are part of a team that is developing a prison chaplaincy program. And the website is www.buddhisminprisons.ca/fundraising.html. So today's session is Rainbow Tonglen Meditation, queer compassion, and queer suffering. Queers experience a lot of suffering due to intersecting oppressions and social injustice. This can be an opportunity to develop compassion for ourselves and all the other people in similar situations. In this session, Kody Muncaster teaches a queer version of Tonglen, the Tibetan meditation practice of taking and giving, where we breathe in suffering and breathe out a rainbow of light compassion. Thank you so much for being here, Kody. I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, well, thank you so much. So I'm Kody Muncaster. I use they, them pronouns. I'm non-binary and queer. My internet is very unstable, so if anything happens, I will return, or you can put a note in the chat if something is going on. So I'll briefly introduce myself and a little bit of my background, my work, and then we're going to talk about Tonglen, the taking and sending meditation of compassion. So I'm a PhD candidate in gender and sexuality studies at Western University in Canada. And my research is around the potential for the AIDS sector here to work on suicide prevention because they're already working with our communities. I'm also simultaneously a master's student in Buddhist studies online at the University of South Wales, and my research there looks at queer and trans Buddhism. So I came to Buddhism through my own experience in psychotherapy when I was a teenager, and after being introduced to mindfulness, I really wanted to dive deeper and to explore the religious aspects of Buddhism. I consider myself kind of a non-sectarian Buddhist right now. My practice is largely in the Zen tradition. Currently, I took the Bodhisattva vows in the Zen tradition, However, I'm highly influenced by Tibetan Buddhism, Theravadan Buddhism, and the Pure Land faith as well. Professionally, my background has been largely in the helping professions. So I've worked in mental health group homes, at a suicide helpline, in the HIV and AIDS sector. I've worked in trans health research, and I am also a former foster parent of LGBT youth as well. So currently I'm a volunteer grief counselor at the Toronto Center for Applied Buddhism, and our Buddhism in Prisons Fund cause, the link to that will be attached to this session. So we're trying to create education programs to train Buddhist chaplains to work in prisons. So that's enough about me. So moving on to Tonglen. So in my experience, I think that there's a great deal of suffering in the queer communities, and this offers opportunities for deepening our compassion. So Tonglen is the practice of taking and sending. It's a compassion meditation that is practiced in many forms of Buddhism, but largely in the Tibetan tradition. And so here we inhale suffering and we exhale compassion. So this is a bit counterintuitive. If you're used to some of the New Age meditations that you can find online, or on YouTube, or in some books on positive thinking, a lot of meditations will tell you to inhale the good and exhale the bad. That's not what we want. So we actually want the opposite. We want to be able to embrace suffering and to dive deep into the dark waters of pain, and to feel it, to see it, and to stop running away from it. And we want to use that suffering to inspire us to open our hearts and expand our capacities for compassion. So I'll tell you a little bit about someone named Atisha. So Atisha is a big scholar in Tonglen. They are an Indian Buddhist teacher who introduced something called the 59 mind training or Lojong slogans. So if you're interested, you can take a look at that. In his work in Tibet, there's a slogan actually about Tonglen. So these slogans are kind of words or sentences to inspire one's practice. So slogan 7 of the 59 mind training slogans says, "Sending and taking should be practiced alternately. The two should ride the breath." I would say Tonglen is one of the most powerful practices I've encountered in my life. I find it gives me the tools to encounter pain I feel, and also to enhance my compassion for others. It's something that you can do in formal meditation, or you can also do it when you're walking down the street and you see somebody who you think might be in pain. You can also inhale their pain and exhale compassion. Or if you're going about your day and you're in pain, or you see somebody else who is, then you can do the same thing. So I'm going to introduce the meditation. Then we'll talk a little bit more before we actually do the meditation. So I kind of want you to know a little bit of what to expect before we dive into the practice. So the first thing that I'll get you to do when we meditate is we'll do some grounding, a little bit of breathing and bodily awareness. And then we'll do what Pema Chodron calls a flash on bodhicitta. So we're trying to rest in the awakened heart mind. Bodhicitta is the aspiration to help all beings, and also the actions of taking a stand in social justice and really advocating. And so it's both the drive to do something about the pain in the world and the actual doing. So we'll do a visualization where you kind of imagine your heart expanding. After that, we'll do a visualization where you'll just get used to inhaling. It can be a smoke of suffering. It can be a smoke of any color, or some people like to personify it. So some people will personify suffering as, for example, inhaling a bunch of snakes, or a really, really long snake, or any other kind of thing that really stands as suffering, but the standard seems to be smoke. So inhaling a smoke of suffering and then exhaling a rainbow light of compassion from the heart. So we're inhaling in through the nose and then exhaling through the heart. So we'll do that over for a while until you get used to the visualization. And then once you've got that down, we'll begin thinking of a personal situation. It could be something that you're struggling with, but today I really want to emphasize that we're not thinking about an extreme trauma. So if you'd like to relate it to queerness, perhaps you could think about an issue of internalized queer phobia, perhaps not the worst queer phobic incident that's ever happened in your life, but something that's been mildly challenging, or a challenge that you've had with another person, but not the most extreme thing for now. So you're inhaling for yourself. You can imagine yourself in front of yourself, and exhaling compassion. And then if we have time, we'll look at doing it for a queer person that you love, another queer person who's been really influential in your life. It could be somebody you know personally, or a famous queer person, a neutral person, someone that you're upset with. Then if we have time, all queer people, and eventually all sentient beings. I want to talk a little bit about being triggered. So sometimes we get triggered walking down the street and something will remind us of something horrible that happened. And I think that a lot of the time these physiological reactions can be so painful that we'll do anything to avoid them. And sometimes we get triggered in meditation, and it makes sense that we might not want to touch some of those painful things. I don't want you to trigger a really deep-seated traumatic incident. However, if you are reminded of something, or if you choose to bring up something that actually was quite painful, know that this can be an opportunity to gently expose ourselves to the pain and be able to move through it. So we kind of touch it, we get close, and then coming back to being grounded. So if things become challenging, there are a couple options that we'll go through, and you can learn from triggers and just try not to go too deep, too fast. We're picking an issue of mild intensity. But if you're suffering, you can come back to the breath and stop the visualization and use your own grounding techniques for a minute, and then go back to the visualization for a little bit, and then coming back to the breath. So small doses. Another option is Lama Palden Droldup, I think her name was. There's a book, and I can't quite remember what it's called. But in this book, the author describes some people struggle with Tonglen. So she just suggests that you visualize yourself as Avalokiteshvara, as the Bodhisattva of compassion, or as another compassionate being that has meaning for you. So it's not you that's taking in the suffering. Whereas Pema Chodron suggests that if you're struggling, then you do Tonglen for yourself, for the fact that you're struggling. And then you expand that as soon as you can to all people who are currently doing Tonglen, who are struggling with the meditation, because there are certainly people around the world, not just in this session, but people practicing in monasteries, in their own homes, who might be having challenges. So we're not necessarily actually taking in a person's suffering, so you don't need to worry about being flooded with negative energy or something. This is an exercise, in my view, that where we're trying to open our hearts. So it's a kind of a psychological exercise, though in some traditions they may actually they may actually feel that there's an intent to take on the suffering. So I think it depends on how you look at it. But for today, we'll look at this in a psychological manner. And so nothing bad is going to happen to you through doing this. So before we begin, I'll just make one final note. There's an Indian Buddhist scholar who is highly influential in Tibetan Buddhism named Shantideva. And Shantideva, in his work, explains that we need to transcend the social construction of self and of other. And if you think about binaries in our queer world, this actually is quite compatible, I think, with a queer worldview. So in the queer world, I think that there's a lot of emphasis on transcending constructed binaries, a gender binary, a sexual binary. And Shantideva says the self and other are a binary, the idea that there's a difference between my pain and the pain of somebody else. And instead, we can think about it as pain in general that circulates the world, and as a reservoir of compassion that all of us have the ability to tap into. So Shantideva would say, there's no owner of the pain. People will say, my pain or my anger. He would just say there is anger present, or there is pain. Okay. So we'll start the meditation. So if you can get into a comfortable position, you can choose to have your eyes open or closed. If your eyes are open, you can just rest them a few feet in front of you. And once you're comfortable, just coming to the breath. Finding a place in the body where you feel the breath the strongest. It can be the stomach, the nostrils. Knowing that the breath is always here for you. We can use the breath as a tool to ground ourselves. Noticing if the mind has wandered, and gently, with loving awareness, just bringing it back to the feeling of breathing right now. Noticing the body in space, the feeling of the body sitting. The feeling of the body being breathed. And now bringing your awareness to your chest, to your heart center. Feeling the heart beating if you can, and feeling the chest move with every breath. Now we'll move into a flash of bodhicitta. So you can imagine your heart expanding, 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 bigger and bigger and bigger until it covers the whole world. This growing, loving awareness. And with that flash, you might feel a deep connection to the suffering of other beings. You can arouse a desire to alleviate that suffering, arousing that drive to social justice. Now we'll move into the visualization. So you might begin inhaling a smoke of suffering, any color you like, or you can personify it as a snake or some kind of being. But inhaling that suffering and exhaling through your heart a rainbow of compassion. Might inhale dark, heavy, hot. Exhale light, relief, and love. Just keep practicing that visualization until it starts to become automatic. Inhaling the suffering, exhaling rainbow of compassion. Now bringing to mind a personal situation that you've been struggling with. So not a trauma, could be perhaps a part of being queer that you struggle with, maybe a part of being queer that you don't really like inside yourself, or something that just kind of hurt. And then imagining yourself in front of you, a suffering being just like everyone else who deserves compassion, and a being with a deep reservoir of compassion to tap into. Now, imagine inhaling the suffering from yourself and exhaling a rainbow light of compassion. If this becomes difficult, you can imagine yourself as the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara or somebody else who you find is really compassionate. Inhaling that pain and suffering, exhaling a rainbow light of the compassion that you deserve. Everyone deserves love and compassion. There's nothing wrong with you. Inhaling the suffering. You might exhale some comforting words. Exhale some loving words that you would say to anybody else in this situation. You can imagine all the other people around the world who are probably in very similar situations as yours, knowing that you're not alone. So inhaling that collective suffering and exhaling compassion for everybody who is in a situation just like yours. So now we'll move on. We'll take a deep breath in and out, letting go of that situation. And now bring to mind another queer person who you love, a queer person who you admire. It can be a partner, a friend, somebody famous. And knowing that just like you, just like everyone, they experience suffering from time to time. You want to expand your ability to be there for other people. So when you're ready, you can inhale that person's suffering and exhale a rainbow light of the compassion that they deserve. If this becomes overwhelming at any time, know that you can always come back to breathing normally and feeling the body in space. You're safe here, and you have the skills to be able to ground yourself and to gently touch the suffering of yourself and other people. Inhaling that person's suffering and exhaling anything they might need right now. Exhaling love, can even be exhaling a cup of coffee, exhaling some kind words. You can imagine all the other people who are probably around the world in a similar situation to this person, knowing that by being able to show compassion for this person, you can show compassion for anybody who might be going through whatever they're going through, be it grief, depression, sadness, alcoholism, internalized queer phobia, family challenges. There are a lot of people in a similar situation to this person. So we're going to drop that focus and take a deep breath in and out. So moving forward, you can imagine a neutral person. It can be somebody you saw at a coffee shop, a stranger, just knowing that they suffer just like everybody else. And inhaling that person's suffering, exhaling compassion, even if you can barely visualize them because you barely know them, you can still inhale their pain and exhale compassion for that person. Inhaling dark, heavy, hot. Exhaling a rainbow love of compassion. And dropping that focus. Taking a deep breath in and out. So moving forward, we're going to bring to mind someone that you're kind of upset with right now. So not the person who hurt you the worst in your entire life, but somebody who kind of mildly messed with you recently. You can picture them in front of you and remind yourself that this person is acting out of ignorance. They are acting this way because of their own conditioning, because they think by acting this way they'll achieve happiness. And so they're misguided and they're suffering because of that. We all make mistakes. And you've probably acted in a similar way at some point in your life before. We all do things that we're not proud of. So I want you to inhale this person's suffering, inhale their pain, and exhale a rainbow light of compassion. Inhale, knowing that they are suffering by making this mistake, and exhale, wishing them relief and wishing them love. Reminding yourself that it's possible you could be misinterpreting the situation. So in fact, both of you could be suffering from ignorance in this situation right now. Inhaling the suffering of their conditioning and exhaling rainbow light of compassion. You might even exhale a little bit of forgiveness. If this becomes too challenging, you can do Tonglen for yourself and for all the other people who are currently struggling to do Tonglen meditation. You can expand it to other people who are in the similar situation as the person that you're upset with. Now dropping that focus, taking a deep breath in and out. Another grounding breath in and out. So now I want you to imagine the earth in front of you. You're in space, seeing this beautiful earth. And I want you to imagine all of the queer people in all of the different countries, all over the world. and also all of the queer animals, the lesbian dolphins, the gay penguins. Inhaling that queer suffering and exhaling a rainbow light of compassion that surrounds the entire earth. As soon as that suffering hits your heart, it's transformed. The suffering disappears in your body, and it's fuel that brings that compassion out. You can imagine yourself as Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, who is depicted as male, female, and androgynous, perhaps a kind of trans and queer Bodhisattva. And you can tap into this Bodhisattva's power to inhale the suffering of all the queer people and exhale light and relief to everyone. And then expanding that to all beings, queer and not queer, all sentient beings all over the world. Inhaling that smoke of suffering, exhaling a rainbow light of relief, of love, of compassion. And then dropping that focus, taking a few deep breaths in and out. Another grounding breath in and out. Last deep one in. Sigh it out. Letting the breath return to normal. Coming back to your body. You might feel different parts of the body, feeling the body in space. Coming to the sounds in the room, the sound of my voice. Before we close, I'll read this line from Tokme Zangpo's 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva. This is line 11. He says, all suffering comes from the wish for your own happiness. Perfect Buddhas are born from the thought to help others. Therefore, exchange completely your own happiness for the suffering of others. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. And gently blinking your eyes open, taking any stretches you need, coming back to the room. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. That was Rainbow Tonglen Meditation. Often the meditation is actually practiced with a dark colored smoke and a white light or a yellow lights, but I think that the rainbow light helps us tap into our unique queerness and our unique queer ability to have compassion for people who are suffering from issues like queer phobia. So I'd like to open up the floor to any questions or any comments, you're welcome to raise your hand. I think that would make things the most manageable, or you can also put a question in the chat as well if you'd like. So we'll have about maybe like 10-ish minutes for questions.
Thank you, Kody. So I feel a lot calmer than what I did. So thank you so much for that. I feel like we could use this tool too, like if we're standing like in the line of a store and, you know, somebody does something that's kind of jostles us a little bit, we can just use that same method to approach. So that was really nice. I'll be sure to keep that in mind when I'm out. So I do have a question. I know that some individuals are not necessarily visual. Is there anything like physical that somebody could do for this, for trying to do this practice? I remember I met somebody where they told me I can't visualize anything. Everything has to be sensory and feelings. Is there any suggestions if there's anything you could do in place of that for this meditation?
Yeah, thanks. So I think it can definitely be adapted. It's usually taught in quite a visual manner, so it really works for visual people. However, you could absolutely adapt it. One thing that comes to mind is it can be quite similar to loving kindness in some ways. So I'd have to think about some kind of physical thing. Something off the top of my head isn't coming, but I can think of a word practice. So if you were to inhale something along the lines of, I hear that you're suffering and I hear your pain, and to exhale, may you be happy and may you feel my compassion. Or inhale, this is suffering, suffering is present, and exhale, may you be free of this suffering, may my compassion expand, something along those lines. All right.
Thank
and
you.
Then, thank you. And
Let me go ahead
like,
and see the questions here.
yeah, we've got a question in the chat. So do you have any good resources that we can look into? Yes. And I just remembered the name of that book that I couldn't remember earlier. So it's called Love on Every Breath by Lama Palden. So she's a psychologist and a Tibetan Lama, and she's the one who a lot of people were struggling with Tonglen, so she suggested the visualization of Avalokiteshvara. So her book is really, really good. Pema Chodron mentions Tonglen, and I think like everything she writes. So I'm pretty sure Pema Chodron has a chapter on Tonglen in her book, When Things Fall Apart. It's in a lot of her audiobooks and her like online retreats. I'm trying to think of some of the other names of her books. It's probably in Welcoming the Unwelcome, and whatever else she might have written. I'm trying to think of who else writes on Tonglen. Oh, there's somebody named Jacob, and I can't remember their last name, but they just released a book called A Queer Dharma. And it's on yoga and Buddhism, and they have a practice for Tonglen in there as well. And I'll keep thinking of other books, and I'll say them as I remember them. All right, and
Yeah, we have one more comment too.
Yeah, Suin.
Yeah.
I don't quite understand. Sorry, can you rephrase your comment? I don't get it.
I mean, when inhaling suffering, the feeling that you might be not you, but one, might be sort of like, oh, just suck it up. That's why I use the suck it up phrase. And the other comment I made about superior codependency, it's like, oh, I'm rising above all that, I'm taking the sort of appropriation of other people's suffering, and the idea that we're sort of, above it all. That doesn't mean that. I mean, I understand the concept, and I particularly around bearing witness and the powerful nature of that. However, it's just got this edge of, as does bearing witness for me, this thing of being a bit sort of like above it all, and so that's my concern. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Okay, thanks for your comment. And that's not really the vibe that we're going for, I think, in this practice. So in terms of the suck it up thing, I think that really in Buddhism, we talk about how suffering is everywhere. And a big part of Buddhism is recognizing that our avoidance of suffering just makes it a lot worse. So we want to be able to gently touch suffering and kind of get closer to being able to bear witness of it, but not to completely suck it up and just deal with it, because that's not compassionate. That's not self-compassionate, and that's really, we really don't want to be forcing ourselves to be in situations or to be recalling things that are extremely difficult. We want to go there little by little, and just gently touch what we're capable of touching. And then we want to expand our capacity for being able to touch that suffering so that we're not running away from it all the time. And then we don't want to put ourselves above other people at all. We really want to try as best as possible to kind of flatten those hierarchies, recognizing that we live in a world of power dynamics where certain privileged people have more power over others. But we want to try to recognize that everybody experiences suffering, and everybody has a capacity for compassion. So we're not like this big, amazing person who has compassion for everybody and is so superior to all these other people. Not at all. We want to be humble, and we want to recognize that we all struggle to see the suffering of other people in ourselves, and we just kind of want to work on ourselves and to work on being exposed to difficult things, and to work on trying to be a little more compassionate when our instinct is to run away, or when our instinct is to not be compassionate and to be unkind instead, or mean. But I hope that helps. Any other thoughts?
Okay. Thank you so much, Kody. That explanation was very good. I can see how Suan's comment. Oh, here we go. We have another comment. How it related to that. How do you recommend to balance self-compassion with compassion of the world?
Yes. So I think some people struggle with one or the other. So a lot of people struggle with self-compassion, and a lot of people have very self-critical judgments. And some people kind of have a little bit of challenges having compassion for other people. So it really depends on our conditioning. There are people who their default is anger, and that anger can be directed towards everybody else, and it can be very difficult for them to have compassion for other people. There are people who their default is self-hatred, and there are people who they really just want to shut out all the bad things, and they feel very overwhelmed and are really not looking to hear about difficulties of other people. So we all kind of have an aspect, I think, of compassion that we struggle with, and some of us struggle with compassion for ourselves and with other people. So I think that you can recognize that you have a reservoir of compassion. You do have it inside you, and you have strengths in terms of compassion. So some people on the flip side are really good at compassion for themselves, or really good at compassion for the world, but not the opposite. I would recommend working on the one that you struggle with more, but still doing both. So if you're doing Tonglen meditation, you don't have to go through self, other person, neutral person, the world, person I'm angry at. You can do one of those people, or you can do one or two. So some people, if they're really good at self-compassion, but not compassion for the world, they might still start with self-compassion to tap into it, and then do a longer portion of the meditation for compassion for the world and for other people. And to also do compassion for the world on the spot. So like Void mentioned earlier, doing it in line for a cash register or something. And then the opposite of what I said goes for if you're challenged by self-compassion, but good at compassion for other people. You might start with compassion for other people, tap into that, and then do the rest of the meditation for self-compassion. All right, and then we've got another question. So how to practice in order to overcome internalized homophobia and transphobia? That is a really great question. So I think that you can centralize this in your practice. You can I think internalized homophobia and transphobia, there can be a lot of aspects to it. So some people who have a lot of internalized homophobia, they might have difficulty with relationships and feel really bad about, really uncomfortable with themselves, with imagining themselves in a relationship. They might feel like they're doing something bad in the eyes of God, or they're hurting their family, or they might hate the sound of their own voice if they're a gay man with a really high voice, or a trans person with a voice that doesn't match the gender that they would like. So it can be quite multidimensional, and if there are a lot of different aspects of that, I'd recommend thinking about a particular piece of the internalized queer phobia, and then doing a Tonglen session for that, and then picking another piece of internalized queer phobia, and then doing some Tonglen over a couple of weeks for that, and then gradually trying to understand where it comes from. And also, I think what's really key to that practice is after you do Tonglen for yourself, for your own internalized queer phobia, it's really important that you picture everybody around the world who also shares this feeling, all the other queer people who have internalized queer phobia. And the point of it is to remember that you're not alone. That's why we picture all those other people who are suffering just like us. And you can also imagine the suffering of the people whose conditioning causes them to hurt other people and to create internalized homophobia and transphobia in other people eventually when you're ready. And that can, by doing that, you're not letting them off the hook, but you're getting a deepened understanding of the roots of it. And I think that can kind of help you recognize that this is about conditioning. This is about conditioning that I've got from the world, from my parents, from society. It's not about, it doesn't mean that being queer is wrong. So I hope that helps. Any other final questions before we wrap up? Got time for one more.
Well, I have a comment. When you did mention about visualizing the other people that are in the same situation, I felt like it helped any anxiety, relieve it, like you said, about knowing that you're not alone. So that was really helpful. And
Absolutely.
the message that came up for me was to not be so hard on myself about it, because sometimes we can do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it also can remind us that knowing that we've been there, when somebody else comes to us with a similar issue, we're able to have compassion for them as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Kody, for everything. That was wonderful. And there's a question here about if the recording will be available. Yes, it will be available, I believe, on the YouTube. If anything, if Ben could put in the comment where it would be available, please. So some information about the next session. It's part 3, and the speakers are Venerable Tashi Choida, an NB trans monastic and trans community advocate and social worker from India, Kaushal Rana Singhe, an HIV advocate and gender companion and LGBT youth community leader from Sri Lanka, and Kyle Neo, a designer, author, cancer survivor, and wellness advocate from Singapore. And there's just some important reminders. If you haven't already registered for the event, if you could please do that. So then that way they know how many people we should be expecting. Also, because Zoom has certain, things that need to happen to accommodate everyone who's joining. And there's also a time change for sessions 3 and 4. So the new time is Sunday, 7 p.m. AEDT. That means Sunday morning in North America and Europe. So yeah, there's some time zone shifts happening. I know here in the US, we're gonna go forward an hour or so, but not everybody does that just here. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining us and for being here and sharing this wonderful space together. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, morning, night, depending where you are. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.